A digital garden is a place that makes it possible to make connections between all of the things that you are consuming. So you're not just taking notes in a notebook or writing a blog where things are going to be all chronological. You can write about a certain topic and you can connect it to all of the other things that have to do with that topic or have to do with something adjacent to it. And you can see the ways that all of your interests are interconnected. Like you can see it as if you're looking at the ways that all of the trees are connected below ground. Hello, welcome to Wild Geese. Hi, Hottie Lamatis with the swimmer's bodies. Do you guys remember that from Hannah Montana? I feel like I saw that once when I was 8 and it just stuck in my brain, like a little worm in my brain for the rest of my life. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I want to start this episode by saying thank you so much for listening, for subscribing. We reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Right now we're at, I think, something like 1,300 subscribers on YouTube. I've only put out 4 videos, so that feels like a really big milestone. I know for other big creators, 1,000 subscribers is nothing, but I'm a big believer in celebrating everything.
Everything. Celebrate every single thing.
I was talking to my roommate, Raina, about it, and she was like, congratulations on 1,000 subscribers. I was like, thank you so much. And she looked at me and she was like, if you really think about it, 1,000 people have heard you talk. Like, it's really just listening to you speak. And they've decided that they want to hear more. And that's a big deal. That is a really big deal to me. Because if I think about 1,000 people in a room, you know, like it's really easy to devalue these things when it's online and you look at a subscriber number and you're like, oh, 1,000 people, that's not that much. Some people have 1 million subscribers, blah, blah, blah. But like 1,000 people in a room would be a life-changing amount of people to hear you speak. So I don't know. Thank you. There is a difference between the first season of Wild Geese and this season of Wild Geese, and that this season there's a lot more solo episodes. I really started this show just interviewing people that were interesting to me, you know, like anybody that I saw while I was scrolling on TikTok who I was like, oh, I want to deepen that conversation. I would reach out to them and have a conversation with them. And I had a great time doing that. But I think in coming back for the second season, I realized that a lot of that was sort of a crutch and it was sort of a wall that I could stand behind because I didn't trust that I had enough to say on my own. You know, I've always kind of had this worm in the back of my brain that has told me that I'm not a very interesting person. I remember in high school theater, we all sat in a circle one day and just went one by one and said what our biggest insecurity was, which is an insane thing to do to high schoolers. But I remember saying, like, I just don't think there's anything really interesting about me. So there has been something really deeply healing about the experience of doing this podcast. And I just want to say thank you for that. And that's like a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about today, because I think what we're going to be talking about today is a very concrete tool that can help you be a more interesting person. You might have heard the phrase, in order to be interesting, you need to be interested. Instead of putting all of your thoughts and energy into thinking about, like, how can I be more of an interesting person? I feel like I'm a boring person, all of this stuff. Finding a way to channel your own curiosity and find what you're interested in and really go full force into your interests. That's how you're going to be a more interesting person. And lately I've been seeing so much content, especially on YouTube, about consumption, about people like taking a month off of social media and then sharing their experience with it. People are really, really interested to see how that's going. And I think it's because we've gotten to a point where we're so fatigued with overconsumption. We are all scrolling all day long. We are all intaking more information than we ever should be. It's like if a pilgrim saw the amount of information that we are intaking on a single day, they would just burst. They would explode. They wouldn't know what to do with it. And frankly, I think even we don't know what to do with it most of the time. And I think the blanket advice of create more than you consume is good advice, but it's incomplete advice, because now we're in such a routine of consuming so much and consuming in a way that's really, really shallow. And I think what you first have to do in order to kind of break yourself out of that pattern is to become a better consumer, become a more intentional consumer. And I think one avenue into being a better consumer is taking notes. Stick with me. On New Year's, I went out to a bar and I was waiting in line for the restroom, and this guy comes up and he's waiting in line behind me and he strikes up a conversation. He's like, Happy New Year, blah, blah, blah. We're talking. I'm like, what are your New Year's resolutions? He's like,
I want to have more fun.
I'm like, more power to you. Absolutely. He's like,
What about you?
and I was like, I want to be more creative. And he was like,
How are you going to do that?
and I was like, I'm going to take notes. And he's like,
How is that going to make you more creative?
which is a really fair question to ask. So let's talk about it. Today, I want to dig into not just taking notes, but building a digital garden for yourself. A digital garden is a place that makes it possible to make connections between all of the things that you are consuming. So you're not just taking notes in a notebook or writing a blog where things are going to be all chronological and you can only look at it from like, okay, I wrote this on this date. Instead, you can write about a certain topic and you can connect it to all of the other things that have to do with that topic or have to do with something adjacent to it. And you can see the ways that all of your interests are interconnected. Like you can see it as if you're looking at the ways that all of the trees are connected below ground. You can actually see the way that your thought processes, your interests, your takeaways are starting to all be interwoven. Now, the person that got me into this idea of taking notes as a way to dig in deeper to your creativity and become a better consumer so that you can become a better creator is Odysseys on YouTube. I'll tag him and I'll link the videos that I'm talking about in this episode. But he has a video called Mindful Consumption that was really sort of the entry point into this understanding of taking notes and how it can ultimately deepen your creative practice. But even more exciting, he has a couple of really in-depth videos about the note-taking process itself and the platform that we're doing it on called Obsidian. I'm not going to be doing a full deep dive on the platform of Obsidian and the whole process of taking these notes, but basically he's making a point that we're really in a daze when we're consuming online. There's so much access to so many resources that can be great. They're more accessible than ever. They can literally change your life. But when you're consuming them and not really giving your mind any space or time or intentionality to process what you're consuming, then most of it goes in one ear and out the other. Something I have observed in myself, I think as sort of a byproduct of this situation, is that I can't remember names. And it's not just people's names, it's also like names of TV shows and movies and just like any names ever don't stick in my brain. I'm not a person who can like pull up quotes in my mind and like quote a movie. I'm a very big picture person in my thinking. And what that can mean is that I'm missing a lot of smaller points. And what it could also mean when you're just scrolling mindlessly is that you might see a video that you agree with, but you never fully take the time to think to yourself, why do I agree with this? Or you might see an article that you disagree with and something about it rubs up against your understanding of something else. And you never really take the time to tease those things apart and figure out what you think about that thing. So that's how you're getting stuck in this consumption loop and never really creating anything. It's because you're not inviting your own thought processes into the conversation. And most of the time, inviting your own thought processes into the conversation is how art is made. Ayan Artin has a Substack article titled In Defense of Retention. She makes some really incredible points about the rise of anti-intellectualism, the falling literacy rates, and just all of the things that are implicated when we devalue art and reading in our society, how that really opens the door to a level of callousness and inhumanity that we should not get comfortable with. And so, like I said before, the phrase create more than you consume has its place and validity. But there's also something to be said for I'm not going to speak more than I listen. Any art that has ever been made has been influenced by all of the art that that artist consumed before they made that piece of art. So here's a little excerpt from the article In Defense of Pretension. She says, I am a bundle of all the work I have ever come into contact with. I think I can trace parts of my personality to the Anthony Bourdain documentaries my grandmother used to watch. My sense of humor is a mix of my mother's dryness and the work of Rick Riordan. If we all see the same 5 clips on TikTok, the same 3 films, how will we ever be individual? Part of my love for the arts comes naturally from my profession as a writer. The irony here is that I do not have the words to adequately formulate just what this craft has given me. If I was forced to, I'd sum it up as power. These words I write are little pieces of me. It's why I'll never buy into this separate the art from the artist nonsense. This work did not birth itself. It could not birth itself. It needed my pen to make it be. First, there were only ideas, but in my hands, stories and arguments and analysis live. So if we know this, if we know that as artists, not consuming other art is not an option, then let's stop putting so much energy into shaming ourselves for consumption. Instead, say, okay, if I am going to consume this material, let's make sure that I am there as I am consuming it, and I am active as I am consuming it. It's the difference between passively watching a TV show and scrolling on your phone as you're doing it, and watching the TV show and taking notes as you're doing it, and pausing when you have an interesting thought, pausing when you think, oh, that reminded me of this. Oh, that reminded me of this. Oh, I didn't like that part. Why didn't I like that part? What would I have done differently? It's leaning in. I remember in college, I had a professor who was a very old woman, and she was very iconic. Everybody just like worshiped the ground that she walked on because she knew something that we didn't. And we knew that as soon as we walked in the room. And I remember the first day of class walking in, and she didn't even say anything. She was just sitting there. And then with her body, she started showing us how leaned in we should be, how deeply we should be listening. Anytime that we weren't up working on something with her, she was very adamant that we were sitting up straight and leaned in, fully listening the whole time. That's the difference between mindless consumption that eats away at your brain and you feel like shit afterwards and you feel like you didn't actually retain a single ounce of the information that you just scrolled past, and consumption that actually makes creation inevitable. Now, there's a book that I have not read called How to Take Smart Notes by Zonka Arens. And in that book, he outlines something called a second brain. And so no, I have not read the book, but Odysseys, the YouTuber that I mentioned before, laid out the pros of having a note-taking process like this. The first one is it forces you to slow down. I think obviously everybody's all about do it faster, do it faster, do it faster all the time. But when it comes to learning and curiosity and creativity, you've got to go slow to go fast. I think that when I go too fast, that's again why I don't know the names to anything. I'm just like eating up so much content and it goes in one ear and out the other. I can't tell you how many books that I have read and I can't tell you what the book is about after I read it. I can be like, yeah, that was an amazing book. And you're like, what's the plot? And I'm like, I have no idea. So that's number one. Number two is that it is instant feedback. When you're taking notes and you realize that you can't actually put this thing into your own words, like you hear a concept and you think, oh, I get that concept. But then you challenge yourself to take a note and put that thing that you just read or heard or watched into your own words. If you cannot put that into your own words, or you have a really hard time putting that into your own words, that's a pretty clear signal that you actually don't have a good grasp on that concept yet. And you should actually probably return to that and go deeper with that concept. And then the final big pro to note taking like this is that you can see your ideas in a different way than just being presented chronologically. So say that you're taking notes just in a notebook. Really, you can only look at that notebook like from front to back. You might have a table of content that might point you towards a certain page, but thinking about a digital garden or a second brain compared to taking notes in a physical notebook or like writing a blog, which is very chronological, this way of note taking is like creating a network or a web that interlinks your ideas together. And then suddenly you can have a note from 4 months ago that connects to a note that you took today. And if you connected the two of them, suddenly you have an essay. Suddenly you have a speech. Suddenly you have the idea for your first pilot show. But without a way of connecting those two ideas, you might have completely lost that first note to the timeline of your life. So now that I've laid out why you should create a digital garden, let's talk about what a digital garden actually is. And again, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the program that I use because Odysseys has a YouTube video that lays it out so easily, and I am not a software girl. So go watch Odyssey's video and he will tell you how to create this program all for yourself. And you also don't have to use Obsidian. There's a ton of other tools. Some people use Notion. Some people with digital gardening create their own website like completely. But I like to kind of equate this to your own personal Wikipedia. So you know when you're looking at a Wikipedia page, how all of the different concepts that it might be introducing to you are linked. So if you see a word that you don't recognize, you can click on that word and it'll open up a new Wikipedia page. That's also how your notes can look. So you can be taking a note and it can have a certain theme or something in it, and you can click that link and it can take you to all of the other thoughts that you've had about that certain theme. So to put it as simply as possible, what you're going to do is while you are consuming something, you don't have to do this for everything that you consume. You can keep some things purely entertainment based. That's totally fine. If you want to just check out sometimes, do it. Don't shame yourself, whatever. But if you're looking to be a little bit more active in the book that you're reading or the show that you're watching, and you want to glean something from it and actually have takeaways that you will remember months from now, pull out your laptop, pull out your phone, whatever you have your note-taking system on, and take some notes as you are watching that thing. So for example, I recently rewatched Fleabag. Great show to rewatch, by the way.
Do you think I should become a Catholic?
No, don't do that. I like that you believe in a meaningless existence. And you're good for me. You make me question my faith.
And?
I've never felt closer to God.
Fuck you.
And I took notes with every single episode. And by taking notes, I mean like I would pull quotes from things. I would make note of things that I found to be really funny. I would make note of things that I found to be really sad. I would write down things that I didn't notice the first time that I watched it. I'm looking at one of my notes now and it looks like I kind of broke it down based on a couple of different like subheaders for this note. I have observations, comedy, character choices, damn, that's deep, impeccable writing, and editing choices. Because as an editor, the editing was really interesting to watch. The way that you take notes is completely up to you. You're not being graded on this by a professor. These notes are for you. What do you want to write about? You write about that thing. What do you want to remember from the episode? What are some themes that you want to dive into? Okay, so while you are actually consuming the thing, you can take those notes. Some other people like to fully consume the thing and then come back for a second round of consumption where they take notes the second time, but they don't take notes the first time. It's totally up to you how you want to do this. But after you take those notes from the source material, what you're then going to do is take notes that are decontextualized from whatever you just consumed. So these are your thoughts. That's why it's decontextualized. So in the source material notes, you're really taking notes on the actual material itself. You might be bringing in your own voice to the conversation here and there in the source material, but that's not fully what it's for. The source material notes are really for your own understanding of the source material. Then once you have an understanding of the source material, then you go to the main notes, which are decontextualized from those source material notes. So for example, I'm going to read a little bit of one of my notes on an episode from Fleabag. If you've never seen Fleabag before, maybe you don't listen to this part. It's definitely a spoiler, but like you should watch Fleabag at this point. It's been out for years. It's an incredible show. There's kind of no excuse at this point. But here's a little excerpt from my source material notes. So this is just as I'm watching the show, I'm pausing the show, I'm taking these notes, I'm continuing the show. I might rewatch the show and take some more notes, but this is about the show that I'm taking notes on. This is not amazing writing. This is just notes that I'm like very quickly writing as I'm watching the show. So like, don't judge my writing. That's not what this is about, okay? I just want to show you how the source material notes are really about what you are consuming, and then the main notes that are decontextualized from the source material are about your thoughts on what you are consuming. So this note is happening right after her sister Claire got that horrible French haircut and has a breakdown, but then kind of starts to have a breakthrough where she's finally being honest with Fleabag about the fact that she's a bit jealous of Fleabag.
I didn't want my husband's baby. Isn't that awful?
I haven't even asked you how you are. How are you? What's going on with you?
I met someone.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing. What does he do?
He's a priest.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You are joking.
No.
I'm sorry.
I know.
It's just, I'm sure it's very complicated.
Yes.
But it's
very
just
painful.
You're a genius. You're my fucking hero.
I wrote, we realize Fleabag pursues her desires, but Claire doesn't. That's why she's so bitter. And this scene perfectly conveys this. But she's honest for the first time when she says, you're a genius. You're my fucking hero. We then immediately, again, the pacing of every realization and visual display of what we just realized is incredible, see this play out in real time when her crush runs into her at the park and she refuses to say yes to him asking her on essentially a date. She's using her family, her shitty husband, and his weird son from another marriage that she hates as an excuse to say no. She's actively, in real time, saying no because her allegiance falls to not letting down the people who are making her feel trapped. Her allegiance does not belong to herself. Okay, so that's just one little part of the notes that I took on the source material from this episode of Fleabag. Then, though, if I go to the decontextualized notes that I then have my thoughts, and it's my thoughts on the greater world around me, not necessarily like you can reference the source material in the main notes, but like this is really meant to be about you and your thoughts about the world and what you just consumed. So this note says, when we deny ourselves of everything we want, that is what creates great discomfort and steals our peace. We often blame things like love for our discontent, but that's not the source. The source is looking our desires in the eyes and saying, I can't, when we know it's the only thing in the world that we want. And we cling and grasp at things like haircuts because they feel like control. They're not. Illusions of control are constantly pulling us under and away from the actual desire we're too afraid to run towards. Sometimes an unfailing devotion to family can translate to an absolutely abysmal relationship to self, and the family relations suffer disproportionately every time we try to prioritize shit we don't care about. We think we're being martyrs. We're not. We're being selfish every time we choose the thing we truly at our core do not want, because the more severed we are from ourselves, the more havoc we wreak on those we love. We hate the people that dare to follow their desires. They become the scapegoat to our misery. They're irresponsible. They're reckless. They're attention-seeking. That, or they're free. And that really pisses off the people in a cage. Okay, very dramatic, but that's my thoughts. It is about what I just watched in Fleabag, but also, like, that's what I'm thinking about the world. So suddenly you've invited yourself into the conversation instead of passively watching the show, maybe having these thoughts about it, but never like fully putting them down to be a concrete thing of like, yes, I had that thought and I can come back to it now and remember it. So now you have the decontextualized notes, and what you can do is you can create tags for these notes. So tags are like themes, basically. You want them to be pretty general, but like specific enough. And you're going to use those tags as the link between other notes. So the tags I have here are desire, savior complex, suppression, romantic love. And then what's really cool about this note-taking system is that as you take more of these notes, you're going to start to see your patterns in what you are interested in come forward, because you're going to have more and more notes on certain tags and you're going to think, oh, I didn't even really realize that that's like where my brain goes a lot of the time. That's interesting. Maybe I should dig into that more. Because the thing is, that episode of Fleabag, everybody that watches that episode is going to cling on to different parts of that episode and be interested in going deeper with different parts of that episode than I'm going to be interested in. Me personally, right now, I've been super interested in concepts of like women's rage and women's desire and suppression and martyrdom. And it's clear in that note, but it will also become clear in the amount of notes that build up over time in that tag. And in platforms like Obsidian, it visualizes this experience in a really cool way where it shows you the web of your interests and how they all connect. And then it's totally up to you what you want to do with those interests, how you want to dive in deeper with them. Maybe you want to start a Substack and you want to start writing about it. Maybe you want to start a podcast and you want to start talking about it. Maybe you want to take the things that you're so interested in your notes and you want to write a film about it. Maybe you want to create a song. I don't know what it is. I don't know what kind of artist you are. But I think the point is, we never like sit down to create something with a full understanding of what it is that we want to create at the start. We have to go through the long, laborious, sometimes boring, sometimes embarrassing process of creating it and of finding our own interests and curiosities and questions along the way. And this note-taking process can be your friend in that. And I don't know, like with Fleabag, I remember loving Fleabag. The first time I watched it, I was obsessed. But how much of it did I retain? How much of it did I fully digest the first time around. I don't know. I mean, when I sat down to watch it again, there was so much that I had forgotten, and that's natural and that's fine. But I am happy now that I have so much material from the notes that I have taken that now I can look back on whenever I want to. That's like super exciting to me. So anyway, if you're interested in doing this for yourself, definitely go check out Odyssey's video on it. Again, it will be linked in the description. And I just want to leave you with a couple of the key factors that make up a digital garden. If you're ready to become a little digital gardener with me, this essay is called A Brief History and Ethos of the Digital Garden. And there are a couple of key factors that make up the digital garden. Number one, topography over timelines. Gardens are organized around contextual relationships and associative links. The concepts and themes within each note determine how it's connected to others. This runs counter to the time-based structure of traditional blogs, posts presented in reverse chronological order based on publication date. So again, it's less like a blog or a journal where it's chronological, and it's more like making a Wikipedia page that's all for you. The second factor that makes up a digital garden is continuous growth. So gardens are never finished. They're constantly growing, evolving, and changing, just like a real soil, carrot, and cabbage garden. This isn't how we usually think about writing on the web. Over the last decade, we've moved away from casual live journal entries and formalized our writing into articles and essays. These are carefully crafted, edited, revised, and published with a timestamp. When it's done, it's done. There is no final version on a garden. What's cool about this, though, is that if you do want to write an article or an essay, this makes it so that you've got a foundation of writing to start from all of your past consumption, and that's really exciting. Number 3, imperfection and learning in public. Gardens are imperfect by design. They don't hide their rough edges or claim to be a permanent source of truth. Number 4, they're playful, personal, and experimental. Gardens are non-homogeneous by nature. You can plant the same seeds as your neighbor, but you'll always end up with a different arrangement of plants. I really like this because if we think again back to the quote that I read earlier from the essay In Defense of Pretension, she made a point to be like, hey, if we're all seeing the same TikToks and watching the same films, how are we ever going to be individual? And that's a really good point to make. It's why you have to introduce your own interpretation of things into the conversation. And your own interpretation, your own curiosity is naturally going to start leading you away from what everybody else is consuming and towards something that's more true to you. And number 5, intercropping and content diversity. Gardens are not just a collection of interlinked words. While linear writing is an incredible medium that has served us well for a little over 5,000 years, it is daft to pretend working in a single medium is a sufficient way to explore complex ideas. It is also absurd to ignore the fact we're living in an audio-visual cornucopia that the web makes possible. Podcasts, videos, diagrams, illustrations, interactive web animations, academic papers, tweets, rough sketches, and code snippets should all live and grow in the garden. We're not just talking about taking notes on books or movies. I've taken notes on YouTube videos that I've watched. I've taken notes on TikToks that I've watched. Like, some TikToks are 10 minutes long now, okay? So if you feel like it actually really has enough information there for you to want to tease apart and like put yourself into the conversation of, you take notes on that, okay? And then the last thing is independent ownership. Gardening is about claiming a small patch of the web for yourself, one you fully own and control. So as you're taking these notes, keep that in mind. This is for you. This is not to post. Some of this stuff can become an idea that's fully fleshed out in a way that you want to post to the web, but so much of it is just for you. And that's okay. It's for your own learning, for your own understanding, for your own tracking of your interests. I know that sometimes when I'm like writing in my journal or something, it's easy to kind of have like an audience in your head watching you create these things. And sometimes you can like write with this reader in mind, that sometimes it is just more useful to write without that reader in your mind, as if nobody is ever going to read this stuff except for you, which that's another thing. You should go back and read your own notes. Remind yourself of what you were thinking. Like reading back that note just now, that's the first time that I've read that note since I wrote it. And I'm like, whoa, I had that thought. Post that thought, girl. Okay, yeah, that's all I have for you today. Go take notes if you want to, if you feel like it. It genuinely is so fun. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.